My daughter said I was ruining her big day, but she didn't expect what I was carrying. I never thought my own daughter would call me an embarrassment in front of 50 strangers, but that's exactly what happened the night before her wedding. The church smelled like fresh lilies and expensive perfume when I walked in for the rehearsal. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, my hands shaking the whole way. In my jacket pocket, I carried a worn photograph of my late wife, carefully protected in a plastic sleeve. I wanted her there somehow, even if just in spirit. When Lily saw me touch my pocket, her face changed completely. She stormed across the aisle, heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "What is that?" she demanded, loud enough that conversation stopped. I pulled out the photo gently, showing her mother's warm smile. "Dad, no," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You're making everything about Mom again. Patricia doesn't like sad energy at celebrations." The room went silent. Everyone stared at me like I'd committed a crime. "You're embarrassing," Lily continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Why can't you just be normal for once?" I slipped the photo back into my pocket without a word, my throat too tight to speak. As I turned away, I caught Patricia's eyes from the front pew. She was smirking. Back at the cheap motel I'd booked, I sat on the scratchy bedspread and replayed the moment over and over. The fluorescent bathroom light flickered through the half-open door, casting strange shadows across the peeling wallpaper. I remembered when Lily was 12, crying at her mother's funeral, begging me to never let anyone forget Mom. "Promise me, Daddy," she'd sobbed into my shirt. "Promise we'll always remember her together." Now, 15 years later, she acted like her mother had never existed. Patricia had changed everything. She was Lily's future mother-in-law, wealthy beyond anything I could imagine, and she'd paid for the entire wedding. The dress, the venue, the flowers, the honeymoon, everything. I understood what money could buy, but I never realized it could erase a person's memory. I reached under the bed and pulled out an old cardboard box I'd brought from home. Inside lay a letter from my late wife and a sealed envelope. The envelope was marked in faded blue ink, "For Lily," on her wedding day. The next morning, I arrived early at the venue to help set up chairs. My back ached from years of mechanic work, but I wanted to be useful somehow. I was arranging flowers near the entrance when I heard voices from the side room. Patricia's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "Once they're married, we'll have her take our last name properly," she said with casual cruelty. "And honestly, Mark needs to cut the dead weight. That broke mechanic dad should just stay quiet and grateful we're even letting him attend." Her husband laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. The man showed up in a suit that probably cost $40. "It's almost sad." They continued discussing how the wedding would look better in photos without me hovering in the background. I stood there, frozen, holding a bouquet of white roses. My hands didn't shake this time. Something cold and clear settled over me like winter frost. I carefully set down the flowers and walked away without making a sound. But my mind was already working, planning, calculating. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. That evening, my phone rang. Lily's name flashed across the screen, and I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice sounded strange, emotional but somehow distant. "Dad, I've been thinking," she began, and I knew what was coming. "Maybe it's better if you don't come to the ceremony tomorrow. Patricia thinks it might throw off the mood, and I just want everything to be perfect." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "If that's what you want, sweetheart. It's not personal," she added quickly, though we both knew that was a lie. "We'll celebrate together later, just you and me. I promise." I agreed because arguing would only make things worse. After hanging up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I reached for the box again and pulled out my wife's letter to me. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, Tom, when this day comes, remind our girl who she really is. Promise me. I whispered into the empty room, guess we'll keep our promise a different way. I couldn't sleep that night, so I reread everything my wife had left behind. We'd been married 23 years before cancer took her. She'd been a teacher, practical and loving, always thinking 3 steps ahead. I remembered the day she'd called me to her hospital bed, 2 weeks before she died. I need you to listen carefully, she'd said, her voice weak but determined. I've set something up for Lily's future. When she gets married, you'll understand everything. At the time, I'd been too heartbroken to ask questions. Now, holding the documents she'd prepared, I finally understood the gift she'd planned. My wife had been smarter about money than I'd ever been. While I worked overtime at the garage, she'd been quietly investing, saving, planning. The memory box contained more than just letters and photographs. There was a separate envelope I'd never opened, addressed to me in her handwriting. My hands trembled as I carefully tore it open. Inside was a bank document and a letter that made my breath catch. The letter explained everything in my wife's precise, teacher-like handwriting. 20 years ago, she'd used a small inheritance from her grandmother to buy undeveloped land outside town. She'd put it in Lily's name as a trust, managed carefully through the years. Tom, the letter read, this land is now worth nearly $2 million. I invested it for Lily's wedding day, so she'd always know where real love comes from. Not from grand gestures or expensive parties, but from parents who sacrifice everything to build her future. Tears blurred my vision as I read further. The land was in the same county where Patricia and her husband lived. In fact, I recognized the location from news articles about new development projects. Patricia's family had been trying to buy that exact property for their expansion plans. They had no idea the poor mechanic's daughter, they were marrying their son to actually own the most valuable undeveloped land in the county. Tomorrow, at that wedding, my daughter would become the wealthiest person in the room. And Patricia had no idea what was coming. Wedding day arrived with brilliant sunshine and the sound of church bells. I dressed in my old suit, the same one I'd worn to my wife's funeral, and carefully packed the wooden box I'd built with my own hands. Inside, I'd placed my wife's letter, the property documents, and photographs of Lily growing up. People whispered when I walked through the church doors. I wasn't supposed to be there, and everyone knew it. Patricia's face went red when she spotted me. Several guests turned to stare, confusion evident on their faces. I was wearing my worn-out suit and work boots because I hadn't owned dress shoes in years. The box under my arm was plain, simple wood with brass hinges I'd installed myself. The priest hesitated when he saw me, glancing nervously at Patricia. But I walked forward calmly and handed him the envelope marked, "Private," for Lily. He opened it slightly, read the first line, and his expression changed. He nodded slowly and gestured for me to enter. Patricia's whispers grew louder, but I didn't look back. I'd barely made it to the lobby when Patricia cornered me like a predator trapping prey. Her diamond necklace caught the light as she moved, probably worth more than my entire yearly salary. "You weren't invited," she hissed, her polite society mask completely gone. "How dare you show up here and make a scene?" I met her eyes calmly, keeping my voice steady and low. "A father always keeps his promises, ma'am. Your daughter specifically asked you not to come," Patricia continued, moving closer. "You're being selfish and pathetic. This is her special day, not yours." Before I could respond, Lily appeared from around the corner in her massive white dress. She saw us together, saw the wooden box in my hands, and something inside her snapped. "You're ruining my big day," she shouted, her voice echoing through the marble hallway. Guests poured into the lobby, drawn by the commotion. Everyone stared at us, the poor father in his cheap suit being confronted by his ungrateful daughter. The humiliation was exactly what Patricia wanted, and I could see triumph in her smile. I quietly set the wooden box down on a nearby chair and turned to leave without another word. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. The ceremony went on without me. I sat in my truck in the parking lot, windows down, listening to the organ music drift through the summer air. I'd done what I needed to do. The box was there, waiting. After an hour, the music changed to celebration songs, and I knew the reception had begun. I started the engine, ready to drive home, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Sir, you need to come back inside now." I hesitated, then walked back toward the building. Through the windows, I could see the reception hall lit up like a fairy tale. During dinner service, the maid of honor had discovered the wooden box still sitting where I'd left it. Curious, she'd carried it to the head table and handed it to Lily. Patricia immediately grabbed Lily's arm, her voice sharp and commanding. "Don't open that now, dear. It's inappropriate timing." But Lily's hands were already on the lid. Something in her expression had changed, like she was remembering something important. She lifted the lid slowly, and I watched from the doorway as her face transformed. Inside the box were photographs chronicling Lily's entire childhood. Her first day of school, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, scraped knees being bandaged. In every photo, my wife's love radiated like sunlight. But beneath the photographs was the sealed letter, the one my wife had written 15 years ago. Lily's hands shook as she opened it. The room had gone quiet, and somehow the officiant's microphone picked up her soft sobs as she began reading aloud. "My darling Lily," the letter began in my wife's familiar voice. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, but my love isn't. Your father and I built everything we had with our bare hands and honest work. Never let the world buy your love, or you'll lose the part of you that's priceless." Lily's voice cracked as she continued reading. Guests leaned forward, straining to hear. My wife's words filled the hall like a ghost speaking truth to the living. "Remember that real love doesn't demand gratitude or obedience. It doesn't require you to forget where you came from. Love that makes you ashamed of your past isn't love at all." Patricia lunged forward, trying to grab the letter. But as Patricia reached for the letter, something else slid out of the box and landed on the white tablecloth with a soft thud. A legal envelope, crisp and official, with Lily's full name printed across the front. Patricia froze, her face draining of color so quickly she looked like she might faint. Lily picked up the envelope with trembling fingers and opened it carefully. Inside were property documents, deeds, and legal paperwork with official county stamps. Her eyes grew wider as she scanned the pages, her mouth opening in shock. "This land," she whispered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Mom left me land worth." She couldn't finish the sentence. The documents clearly stated the value, $1.9 million, held in trust and now fully transferred to her name. Patricia's husband appeared behind her, reading over her shoulder. His face went from confused to horrified in seconds. "That's the Morrison property," he breathed, using the previous owner's name. "That's the land by our new development. We've been trying to buy that for 2 years." Patricia whispered to him frantically, her polite mask completely shattered. "That broke mechanic just made his daughter a millionaire." What nobody in that room knew was that I'd spent the last 3 months preparing for this exact moment. After Patricia started controlling Lily's life, I'd consulted with lawyers about my wife's trust. The land had been in Lily's name since birth, but I'd managed it as trustee until her 25th birthday, which had passed 2 years ago. I'd transferred the deed formally to Lily the day before the wedding, ensuring every document was filed correctly with the county. No one could contest it now, no matter how hard they tried. Every insult I'd endured, every humiliation Patricia had thrown at me, I'd accepted in silence because I wanted the timing to be perfect. I wanted Lily to see, in front of everyone, what real love looked like. Not Patricia's controlling money or her son's weak compliance, but the love of parents who'd sacrificed everything to secure their daughter's future. Back in the reception hall, Patricia grabbed her husband's arm and hauled him toward the exit. Her diamonds sparkled under the chandelier lights as she fled. But it was already too late. The truth was out. Patricia's husband cornered Mark, Lily's new husband, near the bar. I couldn't hear their whispered conversation, but I could read their body language clearly. Mark's shoulders slumped lower with each word. Finally, he broke away and approached Lily, who was still holding her mother's letter like a lifeline. "Lily, I need to tell you something," Mark began, his voice barely audible over the music. The nearby guests pretended not to listen while obviously eavesdropping. "My parents have been pressuring me for months to distance you from your father. They said it was for our image, for our future. They wanted you to take our family name completely and cut ties with your past." Lily's face went pale. "And you agreed?" "I thought they knew best," Mark admitted, shame evident in his voice. "They've always been successful, and your dad seemed like he didn't have much to offer. I was wrong." The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their plates. Lily stared at her new husband, and I saw the exact moment she realized the truth. Her father, the embarrassing mechanic in the cheap suit, was the only person who'd never tried to buy her love. The reception was falling apart when Mark's business partner arrived late, looking confused by the tension. He approached me directly, which surprised everyone watching. "Mr. Tom," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I want to thank you for the information you provided 3 weeks ago." Lily's head snapped up, and Mark looked like he might be sick. The business partner continued, oblivious to the drama. "Your tip about the Morrison land ownership helped me avoid a terrible investment. Patricia and her husband were trying to pull me into a development deal based on false promises about acquiring that property." He laughed without humor. "They'd already secured financing based on projected returns from land they didn't even own. It's fraud, basically." Patricia's husband was on his phone near the exit, and suddenly his face went completely white. He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it like it had bitten him. "We've lost the bid," he announced to Patricia, his voice hollow. "The bank pulled our financing. The entire Morrison development project is dead." Patricia made a sound like a wounded animal, and several guests gasped. I'd been standing in the lobby, watching through the doorway, when Lily suddenly spotted me. Her eyes locked onto mine across the crowded room. She gathered her massive dress in both hands and ran toward me, not caring that she knocked over a flower arrangement. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Dad," she sobbed, throwing her arms around me. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I held her gently, the way I used to when she was small and had nightmares. "Shoo, sweetheart. You've got your mother's fire. Just remember where it came from." Around us, guests whispered and pointed. Mark approached slowly, trying to salvage the situation with a weak smile. "Mr. Tom, perhaps we can all sit down and discuss this calmly." Lily pulled away from me and looked at her husband with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, clear, and certain. Without a word, she reached down and pulled off her wedding ring. The diamond caught the light as she held it up for everyone to see, then placed it carefully on a nearby table. The room erupted in shocked gasps and frantic whispers. 2 weeks later, Lily showed up at my garage unannounced. I was under a Honda Civic, replacing brake pads, when I heard her voice. "Dad? You here?" I rolled out on the creeper, wiping grease from my hands with an old rag. She looked different, smaller somehow, vulnerable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of designer clothes. "Patricia's investments fell apart," she said without preamble, sitting on an overturned crate. When her husband's development deal collapsed, it triggered a chain reaction. They'd leveraged everything on projected profits. Mark's trust fund was tied up in their business ventures. She laughed, but it sounded more like crying. I'm technically wealthy now because of Mom's land, but I feel completely broken inside. I didn't say, "I told you so," or lecture her. I just made us both coffee in chipped mugs from my office, the way we used to on Saturday mornings when she was young. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the radio play old country songs. Finally, she looked at me seriously. "Dad, what did you really bring that day?" I wiped my hands one more time and walked to my battered toolbox in the corner. From the bottom drawer, beneath wrenches and socket sets, I pulled out a small flash drive. Lily's eyes widened as I handed it to her. "I've been keeping records," I explained quietly, sitting down beside her. "About 6 months ago, I started noticing how Patricia and Mark talked about your future. They mentioned property deals, asset transfers, things that didn't sit right with me." The flash drive contained everything: recorded phone conversations where Patricia discussed manipulating the land ownership through Mark after the wedding, emails between Mark's father and their lawyers about securing the Morrison property through marriage, and financial documents showing their planned scheme. Patricia had it all figured out, I continued, my voice steady despite the anger I'd carried for months. "Once you were legally married to Mark, they'd convince you to sign papers simplifying your assets. Within a year, they'd have controlled everything your mother left you." Lily's hands shook as she held the tiny drive. "You knew all along?" "I didn't want revenge, sweetheart," I said softly. "I wanted you to see the truth yourself." Lily took the flash drive to a lawyer the next morning, one I'd already consulted with about the situation. The lawyer was a sharp woman named Catherine who specialized in family law and estate protection. She reviewed everything methodically, her expression growing darker with each document. "This is attempted fraud," Catherine said flatly, looking at Lily across her mahogany desk. "Patricia's family planned to reassign your land rights immediately after the wedding. These emails clearly show intent to deceive and manipulate. If you'd signed any of these papers they prepared, you'd have lost everything." The legal process moved quickly after that. Catherine filed injunctions, cease and desist orders, and formal complaints with the County Business Bureau. She secured Lily's assets completely, putting safeguards in place that would protect the land from any future schemes. 3 days later, Patricia received her cease and desist letter by certified mail. According to Catherine, who heard from Patricia's lawyer, the woman had collapsed while reading it. Her husband's business partnerships dissolved within a week, and their creditors began circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. Patricia lost everything: her reputation, her social standing, her carefully constructed empire built on manipulation and lies. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this story and also hit the subscribe button to get notified of our new series. The local news picked up the land fraud scandal within days. Reporters loved the story: wealthy family attempts to steal inheritance from young bride through elaborate scheme. They camped outside Patricia's estate and the courthouse, hungry for details. I refused all interview requests, keeping my head down and continuing my work at the garage. But Lily decided to speak publicly, and I supported her choice. She stood in front of cameras wearing simple clothes, her voice steady despite visible nervousness. "I want to tell you about a man who built everything with his hands and lost everything but his dignity," she began, and my eyes filled with tears as I watched the live broadcast on my phone. "My father is a mechanic who never made much money, but he and my mother gave me something more valuable than any amount of cash. They gave me integrity, love without conditions, and a future they'd sacrificed everything to secure." The clip went viral within hours, shared across social media platforms millions of times. People loved the story of the humble father who'd outsmarted the wealthy manipulators. Patricia's name became synonymous with greed and deception. Her reputation collapsed publicly and spectacularly, exactly the way she'd feared most. 3 months after the wedding that wasn't, Lily decided to host a small gathering at her childhood home, which I'd somehow kept through all the lean years. She'd spent weeks cleaning it up, repairing the porch I'd been meaning to fix, painting the kitchen the same yellow her mother had loved. Neighbors came, people I'd known for decades who'd watched Lily grow up. My co-workers from the garage arrived with their families, bringing casseroles and stories. Old friends of my wife's came too, teachers and librarians and normal, kind people who'd loved her. Lily had set up a projector in the living room, and halfway through the evening, she dimmed the lights and played an old video. It was from Lily's 10th birthday, filmed by a neighbor on an ancient camcorder. My wife appeared on screen, laughing and beautiful, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "If love ever feels like a debt," she said to the camera, addressing 10-year-old Lily, "it's not love at all. Real love sets you free. Remember that always, baby girl." The room fell silent except for soft crying. I couldn't watch anymore. I quietly stepped outside onto the porch, letting tears fall freely in the darkness. Behind me, I heard a car engine approaching. The headlights illuminated the driveway, and I recognized Mark's expensive sedan immediately. He parked and sat there for a long moment before finally getting out. We stood on opposite sides of my porch, two men who'd never really known each other. "Mr. Tom," he began, his voice hoarse like he'd been crying. "I came to apologize. My parents manipulated me my entire life, and I let them do the same to Lily. I was weak and greedy and stupid." I didn't respond immediately, just looked at him carefully in the porch light. He'd lost weight, and his expensive clothes hung loosely on his frame. "My mother convinced me that controlling Lily's assets was protecting our family's future," Mark continued. "She made it sound reasonable, even noble. But it was just theft dressed up in fancy words." I leaned against the porch railing, feeling every one of my 57 years. "You've got a lot of rebuilding to do, son. Start with your conscience, and maybe someday you'll figure out what love actually means." Mark nodded, tears visible on his cheeks, and returned to his car without another word. I watched him drive away into the night. Inside the house, I heard Lily laughing at something someone said. Lily spent the next several months figuring out what to do with her mother's gift. The land was worth nearly $2 million, but selling it felt wrong somehow, like betraying her mother's sacrifice. One evening, she arrived at my garage with rolled-up blueprints and an excited smile. "I want to build something," she announced, spreading the papers across my workbench. "A community center, in Mom's name. A place where people can learn trades, get job training, access resources they need." I studied the plans carefully, my mechanics' eye evaluating the structure and design. "This is solid work, Lily. Really solid. I want you to help me design it," she said, looking at me hopefully. "You built our house practically by hand, and you've been fixing things your whole life. I need your expertise." So we started working together, evenings and weekends, designing a space that would honor my wife's memory by helping others. We planned automotive bays for teaching mechanic skills, woodworking shops, computer labs, and meeting rooms for community organizations. It felt right, turning Patricia's greed into something genuinely helpful. Then one afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up to my garage, and Patricia's lawyer stepped out carrying a briefcase. The lawyer was professional but uncomfortable, clearly not enjoying his assignment. "My clients are facing bankruptcy," he explained, standing awkwardly near my toolbox. "Mrs. Patricia and her husband have lost everything due to the collapsed business ventures and pending fraud investigations. They're being forced to sell their estate to satisfy creditors." He opened his briefcase and pulled out paperwork. "They've authorized me to offer the property to Miss Lily as the first potential buyer, given the circumstances." Lily had arrived at the garage to pick me up for dinner, and she stood beside me now, reading the documents. The estate was massive, 12 acres with a manor house, gardens, and outbuildings. Patricia had loved showing it off at her charity galas. "They're asking fair market value," the lawyer continued. $750,000. "It's actually below market because they need a quick sale. I put my hand on Lily's shoulder gently. You should decline, sweetheart. Don't let them drag you into their mess. But Lily's expression was thoughtful, distant, like she was seeing something I couldn't. No, Dad, she said slowly. I'll buy it. But for one very specific reason. The lawyer looked relieved, probably hoping for a quick commission. 6 months later, I stood beside Lily in front of the former Patricia estate, now completely transformed. The manor house had been converted into dormitories and support facilities. The gardens had become playground areas and outdoor learning spaces. Above the main entrance hung a large wooden sign I'd carved myself, Margaret's Home for Single Mothers. Lily had poured nearly $1 million into purchasing and renovating the property, creating a comprehensive support center for women rebuilding their lives. The facility offered childcare, job training, counseling, legal aid, and transitional housing. Everything my wife would have wanted. Patricia saw the headline in the local newspaper while living in a small rental apartment paid for by family charity. According to people who knew her, she'd broken down completely upon reading about the transformation of her former home. But Lily didn't gloat or celebrate Patricia's downfall. Instead, she sent a simple note through the lawyer: I finally understood what love costs. I hope you do too. The note was never answered, but that was fine. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, reporters crowded around asking questions, and eventually, one of them turned to me. Mr. Tom, she called out, holding up her microphone. What exactly were you carrying that day at the wedding? I looked at the reporter, then at Lily standing beside me in front of my wife's memorial center, and smiled gently. The question deserved an honest answer, even if the truth was simpler than people expected. Nothing fancy, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon. Just a box full of truth, and a promise to a woman I loved. Above us, mounted in the entrance hallway visible through the open doors, hung a large framed photograph of my wife. The same photo I'd carried to the wedding rehearsal, the one Lily had told me to put away. Now it watched over dozens of women and children finding safety and hope in a place built on love instead of manipulation. I looked up at that photograph, at my wife's warm smile that I'd loved for 23 years and missed every day since. We did it, honey, I whispered, too quietly for the reporters to hear. Lily heard though, and she squeezed my hand tightly. Around us, the community we'd built together celebrated not revenge or victory, but the simple truth that love, real love, never demands anything except that we honor it by passing it forward. The wooden box sat empty in my garage now, its purpose fulfilled. But the promise it carried would echo forward through every life touched by Margaret's home, through every person who learned that love builds instead of controls. That was my wife's true legacy, and that day at the wedding, despite the humiliation and pain, I'd delivered exactly what she'd asked me to carry, the truth about what love really means. And in the end, that truth had set my daughter free.